All right, so what do we have here? We have this Asahi Pentax S3, S3 there. It's having some issues with the shutter. There's like shutter lag, looked to be. Really what it turned out to be was mirror lag. Because the mirror and the shutter are kind of interconnected, there's an issue where the shutter would stay open while the mirror was in the up position, and the mirror would not come back down to let the shutter close all the way. So basically what I did was disassemble it to this point so that way I could clean and lubricate the mirror assembly better. Unfortunately, this is an S3 and not a Spotmatic. The information I was going off of was for a Spotmatic. And on the Spotmatics, you need to disassemble down to here, and then you need to remove the mirror housing to be able to properly lubricate it. It appears to be that you can actually properly lubricate the S3 mirror without disassembling to that point. But, you know, it kind of is the way it goes. It's always a bit of a journey. So basically, I'm going to use, at this point, we're going to do a clean before we reassemble. My cleaning solution, everybody has what they like, you know, what they find that works best for them. For me, it's a 50-50 ammonia peroxide mixture. It really does a good job of removing haze and, you know, fungus and anything that's stuck onto the glass a little more aggressively than what you'd want to use or what alcohol can dislodge. So I like to mix it in this glass pump top. It's available off of Amazon, relatively inexpensive, but it's glass and stainless steel, so you don't have to really worry about your chemicals corroding or, you know, causing issues there. These syringes were also purchased off Amazon, and they've worked out really well for me. Not only for, you know, measuring out my solutions for cleaning, but to also apply lubricant, to apply cleaner to delicate areas. It's just, they've been very useful. Kind of a nice purchase. So I'm going to put 15 milliliters of ammonia, and I'm going to do equal parts of peroxide. So the ammonia and the peroxide mixture is great for removing, like I said, fungus or sometimes even haze, something that you know, your average glass cleaners cannot dislodge. It's also a product that, you know, it's not a product, but it's a mixture that works well for soaking your glass in as well. If you're having really stubborn fungus, you know, you can just let it rest inside of it and it'll loosen up on its own. Throughout this process, I'm going to agitate it and, you know, kind of manually clean with some cotton swabs. And I know there's controversy around using a cotton swab or not. I found that cotton swabs work well when you use them in the right way. And now I'm going to go and get another tool and then return with the second tool. That's the, nope, I'm going to edit this out. That's going to suck to edit all this audio out. Okay. So I went and got a second tool, another syringe. These work really well because they kind of have a needle tip to them that screws on and off. It's not a sharp needle, it's just a nice blunt point. As you can see, I continually poke my fingers. I had to re-record the audio for this because cell phone is not great at recording audio, so I'm just kind of trying to read what's going on screen and dictate it to you as I see it. And you know, maybe it'll be interesting, maybe not. The reality is the audio this way is going to be better than the audio coming straight out of the phone, which was just, it was horrible. It was not something that you could even listen to. So I've decided to try and salvage that by going this route. So in the video, the original video, here's where I started talking about cotton swabs and which one and why I like to use them. I kind of prefer them for small, delicate stuff because they're just nice and handy. So looking here at the Pentaprism, you can see that there's really nothing crazy going on with it as far as dirt. There's a little bit of a hazy spot down there close to the viewfinder. A couple little specks of dirt here and there, but nothing crazy. And even I was kind of surprised at how little silvering, or how little there's been an issue with the silvering inside the Pentaprism. A lot of times with older cameras like this, you'll run into issues with the silvering starts to flake off. There you can see a pretty good view of the actual viewfinder window and how kind of smeared up it is. Again, I'm going to remove that kind of like middle lens between the eyepiece and the Pentaprism. It's two flathead screws. Very easy to get out. Nothing too crazy there. Probably found that one screw just didn't want to behave quite correctly with the tip that I had, so I switched out to a little slightly fatter tip. With flatheads, I find that you really want a flathead that engages the entire width of the channel in the tip of the screw. If you can't engage that whole channel with your driver, you tend to just strip them out a lot faster. For screws that are very difficult to get out, that are tight, you really want to make sure that your bit makes full contact with the head of the screw. That way you don't strip anything. Here you can get a pretty good look at the lens in between the eyepiece and the Pentaprism. And here you can see like it's kind of smeared up. There's a little bit of like kind of like a fungus to it, or a haze. Nothing too crazy, but we have it disassembled at this point. We might as well clean it up and make it as pretty as we can when we put it back together. It's just one of those things that's nice to be able to look through a viewfinder and not have it clouded over or anything. So here I use the pump top to dispense some of my cleaning solution onto the Q-tip, and then the Q-tip, just rub it on there very gently. I do not apply pressure to the Q-tip when I'm, cleaning it like this. It is just rub it gently across. I don't know if it's going to come across in the video, but actually doing this, you could see that the Q-tip tips were getting yellow, and kind of had this weird shade to them afterwards. And it's all that buildup that just gets on this glass over the years, kind of coming off, and it's nice to see that. And again, flip it over, use the other side of the Q-tip to kind of dry the solution off the lens. And again, I'm not applying any pressure to the Q-tip. Pressure will probably cause it to scratch. We're not trying to force anything here. We just want it to, loosen up and naturally come off. We're not trying to get it to come off. We're trying to ask it to come off, basically. There you can kind of see on my glove that little bit of yellowing that you get going on. Pump top does occasionally foam up. It's not really a problem. It's just kind of the way it goes. Get a nice healthy dose on the end of that Q-tip, and then just gently rub it around on there, and it moves all that debris off of there, pulls any kind of gunk, and gets rid of it, gets it going. You'll see when I show the results of cleaning it, how good of a job the how good of a job the ammonia and peroxide 50/50 mixture does. I honestly use it to clean all my glass now. Anything that I can do to make it clean easier, I like to do. I also, once you get down to this point where you can see there's like some smearing going on, and that just comes from not really moving anything around too much on the surface, just kind of loosening it, which is what you're trying to do with the Q-tip. You're just trying to loosen debris that's already on top of the glass. You're not trying to necessarily move it out of the way. I like to move stuff with a lint-free rag, because the lint-free rag, I can apply pressure. I can kind of manually squeegee it off with the rag, the lint-free rag, without having to worry about damaging the glass. If you were to try to do that with a cotton swab, try to apply pressure, you're going to scratch it. Cotton's just that way. It's not that soft as you would think. Cotton has it's rough, it's coarse. It will scratch. I just don't apply pressure, and you'll be fine using cotton. Reassembly. Sometimes the gloves just get in the way of the tactile feedback of holding everything together, and I don't like to wear them to reassemble things when I can avoid it. Sometimes there's, things when you have to wear them just so you don't mess up the work that you did. Reassembly the lens into the Pentaprism housing kind of was a little tricky. I kept looking at different ways to get that down into there. And then during the process of that, I noticed that there was some dirt here on the lens side of the Pentaprism, so I might as well clean that off as well. Same thing with this. It's just very gentle. No pressure applied to the Q-tip. Make sure there's lots of fluid. Backside, I don't know. Maybe the viewfinder side? Not really sure. You really call it whatever you want, I guess. So after getting it in there with the Q-tip, I like to try and get some of this lint-free rag in there, and it proves to be a little more difficult than I expected. I guess I should have thought about a better way to do it. Maybe putting the Pentaprism down on the thing and trying to like rub it back and forth, rub the rag back and forth across would have worked better. I don't know. I mean, regardless of, my fumbling around here, I eventually did figure it out and get it working pretty decent, got it pretty clean. So once I was happy with that, I moved on to the large, reflecting window. This window sits pretty tight and pretty flush against the focusing screens. So there really wasn't much dirt trapped here. I find that a lot of times camera manufacturers will leave a decent amount of space in between that portion of the Pentaprism and the focusing screen, and you end up getting a lot of dirt trapped in there. And it's pretty annoying because it feels like you can just wipe it right out, but you can never make contact with that surface. So you have to remove the focusing screens and all that, which usually requires pulling the Pentaprism out. And I just, I have it all apart to this point to try and correct the shutter issue and the mirror issue. So we might as well clean everything before we have it apart, because, I really don't want to be back into this camera. The funny thing is, after having recorded this video and letting the camera sit for a couple of days, the issue returned immediately. So I have to look into that again. It'll make for another video, I guess. Maybe that's the upside. No, we'll see if I can figure it out. I don't know exactly how to go about correcting it from here, because I think I've done everything that I could think of and all the things that I could find in research, but it's going to be a journey, at least, to figure it out. So I don't like to leave, the chemicals lay around on the pad or the mat. And this mat's really nice because it's chemical resistant and all that kind of, advertised stuff. So here I stick my head right in the way so you can't see what I'm doing, because that's, what everyone wants to see is human hair up close. Yeah, great. Way to go. Figuring out which screws go where. Again, the mat has been crucial to me for solving that problem. I would always run into the issue of, how do I organize my screws? How do I keep all that in line and without, losing or mixing them up? And the mat has been very helpful with that. Also, recording the repair process, just having that video to go back to reference, has been very helpful. Whether or not you eventually decide to release them to YouTube like my dumbass has, or whether you just keep them for yourself for your own records, it is nice to have this. kind of documented. It has saved my ass before with repairs where it's like, you see something fall out and it's like, man, where did that come from? And just pull the video back up and take a look at it. Here I was having issues getting the lens housing to line up with the Pentaprism housing to get the screw down through both, to anchor the lens in there. And one of the things I found with flathead screws and these cameras and these tiny screws is your tolerance for cross threading or you know getting the screw to go in sideways or just at a little bit of an angle and stripping things out is very small. It's a very small window. It's very easy to damage the screws during the reassembly process. So it's kind of important to never force the screw into the hole. You kind of want to just let the screw do its own thing, let it kind of fall into place and gently screw it in. This is part of the focusing screen here. This is the first piece that goes in. You can actually tell this is the first piece because of the dirt that's on the side that I have facing away, not the side that I have facing towards us. It was noticeable that there was some cleaning marks and stuff like that on it. So it kind of becomes easy to know which way this goes back in. If you put this in backwards, I don't know what would happen. I don't know if you would be able to tell if it was in backwards or not. I definitely wouldn't want to try just because of the level that I have to get to disassemble to get to this point. But so the side that I just cleaned there is the side that gets, sandwiched in between two elements. So again, not a lot of dirt can get in there. So there really wasn't much dirt there to begin with, which is kind of nice. This is the second piece of the focusing screen. One goes on top of the other. The one in my right hand goes on top of the one in my left hand. And one in my left hand is the one that we can actually access from the mirror housing or the lens side of the camera. Just trying to gently drop these in place. It always helps to have a second hand underneath there. I probably should have been blowing these off with a blower as well as the reassembly process went. And the reason I say that is because I now have a very tiny black hair or fuzzy trapped in the Pentaprism assembly somewhere that wasn't there before I took it apart. So it bugs me that I didn't use the blower that I have to blow this out. But when you're trying to record a video and talk about what you're doing, a lot of things get forgotten. And this is just one of those things. I just absolutely forgot to blow it out, and I should have. And the consequences of my stupidity is now I have to stare at this little teeny tiny black hair inside the viewfinder every time and be reminded of the fact that I'm an idiot. But so reassembly is fairly straightforward with the Pentaprism on the Pentax S3. It literally just seats down inside there. You do have to push down on it a little bit, and I push down just ever so gently. Install the screws in a counterclockwise manner because I took the screws out in a clockwise manner, so I can make sure that the correct screw goes back into the correct hole. This element, I don't know if it's necessary to really kind of take this approach with it, but I went about it as if I were tightening the lug nuts on a wheel, well, an automobile. You just want to kind of snug everything down, and once it's snug, you then go back and retighten, but you try not to tighten in a rotational pattern or a clockwise or counterclockwise fashion because you just end up, getting it to not seat correctly. This was a little bit of a tricky screw to get down in there. There's not much space to work with. I could have taken the shutter speed dial off and it cleared up a little more room for myself. At this point, reassembly is all about just trying to keep it as simple as possible. So you just kind of see if you can do it. And if I couldn't have gotten the screw down in there, I would have removed it. Use tweezers maybe. Sometimes tweezers, they don't work that great for lining the screw up into the hole because you end up sitting it in at a weird angle, and then it's tough to get it back correctly into that hole to make contact with the threads the way it should. Um, but that's the way it goes. So just tightening up the screws. Like I said, kind of do it not in a particular rotational pattern, but roundabout. Some issues with the tool that I was using, the driver. Even though there's a magnet inside there that holds the bit into the handle, the magnet's just not quite strong enough. The shaft is a little too loose, or each tool sits a little loosely in the shaft. I think it probably would be better to have some other type of attachment system to keep the bits inside there, but it works for the most part. I kind of like when the bits fall out and still stay attached to the screw, especially when dealing with flatheads, because then I know I didn't strip it. I know it's wedged in there nice and tight. So here I'm going to check the operation of the camera just to make sure things are still functioning, as I expect them to. With everything reassembled, you kind of want to make sure that things work as you go. That way, you're not getting 6 steps in and realizing that you've got to move backwards a couple of steps. Here I am waving my hands and rubbing them together as if I know what I'm talking about. In reality, I don't. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. Oh, right. Talking about the film counter and the shutter speed dial. Yeah, I don't know. That's some bullshit that probably no one wanted to hear anyway. Just like this audio is some bullshit that no one wants to hear anyway. But at least the quality is better. And that's what it's all about here. Oh yeah, that was fun. So as I removed the film advance lever, you'll notice that the spring, I don't know exactly what type of spring that is. I know that has a name, but I can't remember it, like coil spring or something like that. The coil spring came undone and just flung out, and I was really worried that I was never going to be able to get it tight enough, or that I was going to get it too tight, because I don't know how many times it was wound around. So let's say the manual calls for 4 winds and I have it at 8 winds. Well, now this lever is going to be difficult to advance. It's going to want to fly back closed. It could potentially create all kinds of issues, not knowing how tight to wind it or how loose to wind it. So I was unable to actually locate any information or documentation on what it needs to be. There's very little information out there for this S3. There's a lot of Spotmatic information, but this is not a Spotmatic. It's very similar to a Spotmatic. It's the predecessor to the Spotmatic, but it is not a Spotmatic. So I ended up just winding it until I felt that it was right and reassembled it. And so far, I haven't had any issues with the film advance lever returning or not wanting to return. It seems to function just the way it did before it fell apart. I don't know if that'll come back to bite me or not. Maybe I don't know, I have to do some more research on how much that tension plays into the shutter firing and all that kind of stuff, and resetting and all that. I mean, the crazy thing about these cameras is a lot of these systems are so interconnected that a failure in one or lag in one system causes lag across the board for everything. So when you're diagnosing a problem, it's really important to find the root of the side effect. Otherwise, you just end up fixing side effects, and you can do that all day long and never actually find the true source of the problem. I think that might kind of be what I have going with this camera, where I'm just constantly fixing side effects and not actual root causes. I don't know though. Time will tell. It also just needs to be exercised, I think. Mechanical things and even electrical things, they just don't like to sit idle. It's not what they were designed to do. It's not how they're built. They function best when working. So Got the shutter speed selection dial out of the way, set screws that hold that thing in place, comes out very nice and easy. Trying to make sure that I figure out what's the easiest way to assemble the top plate and get the shutter release button lined up the way it needs to be. Now, that's sometimes a little tricky. You could use grease or something to kind of hold the shutter button into that hole, and that would make things a little bit easier. But then you're applying grease to an area of the camera that gets operated frequently, that's over top of gears. I just think just asking for trouble. Grease and cameras do not get along at all. Grease is not a good thing to have anywhere close. So as I'm reassembling this, I'm noticing that there's some tightness there on the left-hand side, but that's kind of typical. When I was disassembling it, it was tight on that film rewind knob side. I decide at this point that I'm going to clean the top plate off pretty well. Denatured alcohol and a paper towel work best for cleaning, in my opinion. Top plates and bottom plates, especially the surface. The denatured is never going to damage or mar the finish. The paper towel is not going to scratch it, but it has enough abrasive properties to it that it kind of frees dirt up and gets it moving. It's also nice that it kind of absorbs everything for you, so you don't have to really worry about some of that denatured alcohol getting into places where you wouldn't want it. And I don't know. Well, I plan on doing some other videos about talking about denatured alcohol and what's the difference between that and isopropyl and all that stuff, but I don't know. It's all very technical stuff that I don't even know if I understand completely. So I got to figure out how to try and present that. So here I'm going to reassemble or reattach the top plate. If you remember from the other videos, this is held on by 3 screws, one right here by the film advance lever, and one on either side of the viewfinder. Make sure you put in the right screw in the right place. Again, the mat organized makes a big difference. Makes this process go a lot easier, a lot smoother, and just kind of, helps with everything. This was another one that was kind of tricky to get at the slot correctly, and I'm waving my hand around here talking about how I just like to let the screw fall in place, and I don't like to try and force it into place by, changing the angle of your driver to kind of change the angle of the tip of the screw to hit the hole. I would much rather just very gently be turning the screw until it slots in like it wants to. Sometimes I'll even turn it backwards. I'll pretend like I'm backing it out as I'm over top of the screw hole, while putting some downward pressure on, and this kind of forces the threads of the screw to line up to the threads of the hole, and then it kind of drops down in much easier. There's debate as to whether or not that's the best way to go about doing it, but as long as you're not applying tension or pressure to the top of the screw when you're doing it, I don't think you should run into any issues. I have yet to, so maybe that's something I'll encounter down the road, maybe not, who knows. So anyway, I'm going to move on here, show you the mess that I've got of parts, which really isn't that bad. I mean, this is such a simple camera because there is no built-in light meter. The light meter adds another level of complexity, another system that's packed inside of there. And they're finicky because it's an electrical system and it's wired in there, and you got to unsolder, and I'm just not that confident with working on those cameras yet. So I've kind of been, cutting my teeth here on these more manual cameras like the Minolta SR1. And in this case, this is Pentax S3, which, they're great cameras, fun to work on, but they're really simple. So it's a good place to start if it's something you're looking to do. Don't jump right in with anything that's complicated. Find something simple and find something that's broken beyond repair. So it doesn't matter if you break it anymore, but just, learn how these are assembled, and you'll find there's similarities down the road between all cameras and how they're assembled and how they come apart. Making sure that the coil spring is wound tight. And then this is where I first noticed that there is a flag for the shutter to let you know when it's charged. I honestly haven't had a chance to even take this camera out and shoot with it, so I'm not that familiar with the functions and the operations of it. But I noticed it when I was disassembling that there was a flag underneath there, and I was wondering why it was so bright red. And when I put the um, top plate on, I saw that there was a little window there to indicate when the shutter was charged and when it wasn't, which is kind of cool. It's not something you get on a lot of cameras. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. Would I rather have a shutter button lock? Yes, I would much rather have a shutter button lock than a shutter charge indicator. But you get what you get. Trying to figure out the process to reassemble the film counter. It's pretty intuitive, actually, in this case. You kind of have little notches and cutouts where everything kind of fits. And my mat is playing an excellent, playing its role of keeping my screws lined up. The one thing I did find was that I was kind of working close to my screw pile. I typically like to work over top of the rectangle there on the left kind of lower portion of the frame. And that keeps me away from my screws. When I was working here, because I wanted to be centered under the camera, it kind of got in the way. The screw pile kind of got in the way, and I bumped them around a little bit and mixed them up a little. Thankfully, nothing that required figuring out of which screw went where, because some of the screws that got mixed up were easily identifiable. So just trying to figure out here how to get the film counter reassembled. I've run into some issues where, and you'll notice as soon as I start to try to put the plate on that has the film count, just getting it to seat back down inside there the way you want it to was a little difficult. This ring here actually has the physical indication of which frame you are on. It has like a little red arrow. You see that there's some adjustment for where that red arrow actually falls in those screw holes. They're slotted screw holes, so you can kind of dial it in and adjust where that indicator falls. And I kind of just chose a middle ground, didn't twist it one way or the other, and it's close. It doesn't 100% hit on the tick marks of the jog dial, but it's close enough to the tick marks on the jog dial that you kind of know which frame you're on.